Jakey, it's time to talk about Jake DeBrusk, because the Vancouver Canucks seem to have an asset on their hands that might actually legitimately have some value on the trade block. Now I know, you may be looking at this video saying, Lego, what are you talking about? Jake DeBrusk is a player that scored 23 goals last year, and he had 42 points. He's a power play merchant, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a guy that other teams can look at and say actually provides secondary scoring on the man advantage, which is what I think some teams would be interested in, right? And for the good old price of $5.5 million a year till the end of 2032, Jake DeBrusk is not actually that bad of an addition, so of course he has value, right? Right. Just wanted to test y'all a little bit here. But either way, we've got some trade updates on Jake DeBrusk and the Vancouver Canucks front, as was talked about by Bruce Garriock, reporter for the Ottawa Senators, as well as Satya Shah and Bick Nazar earlier yesterday afternoon on Canucks Central and Sportsnet 650. Let's take a look at Canucks news summaries because they summarized the DeBrusk conversation on the program. Bruce Garriock isn't afraid of throwing some rumors out there, and he mentioned the Ottawa Senators are interested in Jake DeBrusk. The Sens have a hard time drawing free agents to their town. The hosts on the radio program, they can't really see a situation where the Senators give Vancouver a first-round pick for Jake DeBrusk, which, let's be real, that's kind of fair. But then finally, they talk about here at the bottom, the most realistic trade for DeBrusk is a similar value trade to what Connor Garland received, a second and a third. Now, just to refresh y'all's memories, that is exactly what Connor Garland got the Vancouver Canucks from the Columbus Blue Jackets, a second-round pick in 2028 and a third-round pick in 2026. For all the great that Connor Garland did with Columbus, starting out his career over there, getting multiple goals in multiple games, 4 goals in 3 games to open up his CBJ stint. Connor Garland unfortunately went pointless in the majority of the games afterwards, and the Blue Jackets fell down to earth, missing out on the Stanley Cup Playoffs in 2026. Maybe that's why Zach Werenski wants a trade, who really knows? But Connor Garland is a guy that Vancouver barely escaped from, making $6 million a year till the end of 2032, and that trade protection that he's gotten, it would have kicked in on July 1st. It hasn't even kicked in yet. But for Vancouver's sake, they didn't want to drag this out until the free agency period, which would give Connor Garland all the control on where it would be he wanted to go. Vancouver weren't restricted in the Connor Garland trade talks before July 1st, which is why they actually were able to send him over to Columbus. Now it's their problem to deal with because Connor Garland's making $6 million a year and he's not scoring in all these games. Not to mention the morale, the personality issues that have been reported and talked about here in this market. I think it's a better path for this Vancouver Canucks team to have gone down that sees Connor Garland get removed and traded rather than sticking it out with him in the lineup. Jake DeBrusk, on the other hand, he is making less money than Connor Garland. DeBrusk is at 5.5. Connor Garland is at 6. When you take a look at the contract situation, you might say that Vancouver was under a strict timeline to trade Connor Garland before his no-move protection kicked in. Well, you can't necessarily say the same thing about DeBrusk, because DeBrusk has had no-move protection from the Vancouver Canucks starting in 2024-2025. But rumor has it that Jake DeBrusk is more open to a trade from Vancouver, not because he is strictly limiting his options. He's not going all Ryan Kessler or Dylan Larkin on Vancouver. He's not saying, hey, only trade me to this team or this other team. Based off of all the reports, it just seems like Jake DeBrusk signed in Vancouver with the intention of actually playing on a competitive team and not being on the worst team in the NHL, not being on a rebuilding squad. Jake DeBrusk is 29 years old, and by all accounts, he's been a really good point producer in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, say what you want about the Boston Bruins, but they make the playoffs every single year, and Jake DeBrusk has consistently gone in there and produced at a relatively decent rate. I mean, this guy is almost built for the playoffs. When you look at it, 47 points in 86 games played, a .55 points per game, and 27 goals too. I mean, DeBrusk having 7 of his 10 NHL seasons spent in the Stanley Cup playoffs is a pretty good mark. Of course, the only seasons that he missed were the Vancouver Canucks seasons. Go figure. But you also have yourselves the willingness that DeBrusk supposedly would have to get traded to a Canadian team. That's something that I think a lot of these other American dudes didn't necessarily prefer. You can talk about Quinn Hughes, you can talk about the Dylan Larkins of the world, maybe the same could be said about Matthew Tkachuk, maybe Brady Tkachuk, maybe Austin Matthews and Connor Hellebuck, but Jake DeBrusk, you know, he's a good old Canadian kid. Edmonton, Alberta is the place of birth. His dad works for the Edmonton Oilers broadcasts. So if Jake DeBrusk were to get traded, it does seem like a Canadian team is a possibility, whether it is the Edmonton Oilers or, as talked about by Bruce Garriock, the Ottawa Senators, a team that always has a difficult time attracting free agents because, I mean, look, they're the Ottawa Senators. Do I need to expand on that? Being real here, though, Jake DeBrusk on Ottawa, I think, could provide a really nice scoring element to that team. We already saw what they can do with the best of their lineup. I'm thinking about the Timmy Stews and, of course, the Brady Tkachuks. These guys obviously disappeared in the Stanley Cup playoffs. 4 games and 0 points for Brady Tkachuk as the Sens got swept by the Carolina Hurricanes. But this is a team that has some pretty good scoring throughout. Adding a guy like Jake DeBrusk to his second power play triggerman sounds like a pretty good deal, in my opinion at least. Maybe he could get something going on with Claude Giroux, or Fabian Zetterlund, or Dylan Cousins. Good old Canadian kids going out there and working hard and scoring some goals. Jake DeBrusk was able to get himself 23 goals on a very bad Vancouver Canucks team. If he was on the Ottawa Senators, he'd probably have 25 to 30 goals, and I don't actually think that's unrealistic when you look at the body of work that Jake DeBrusk has been able to put up in Vancouver. Although you could also debate, maybe if DeBrusk is not on power play 1, that reduces his goal production a lot too. I don't know. There are a number of elements that you can dive into with that, but ultimately, if the Canucks are able to trade away Jake DeBrusk for the Connor Garland trade package of a second and a third from a team like Ottawa that supposedly really wants him, I'd be super on board with that. Open up another roster spot for a guy like Lekaramaki or whatever. Have that power play option available for these young dudes. Put them in positions to grow, develop, and succeed. And don't necessarily give one of the top spots on the team to a 29-year-old who is essentially already established in the National Hockey League and who would probably be more interested instead in being on a playoff contender. Ottawa made the playoffs this year. They could have used a guy like Jake DeBrusk. They weren't scoring any goals in their Stanley Cup playoff series. I mean, Drake Batherson got 3 out of the 5 goals scored by Ottawa Senators guys. You know who would have scored if he was on your power play in the playoffs? Jake DeBrusk. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the supposed interest that the Sens have in DeBrusk? What do you think about a second and a third as a potential trade price? And do you see DeBrusk actually getting traded and waiving his no-move protection in order to go to any team like Ottawa, for example, that would actually be interested in acquiring him? Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.